There are two kinds of power. Point one kind walks into the room wearing armor, shouting, "I'm in charge." The other kind walks into the room with a ledger and whispers, "Your bills are due." And that second kind, that's the one that runs the world while the first kind is busy posing for statues. Today we're telling the story of Cosimo de Medici, a man who didn't conquer with an army, but still took control of a city, not by becoming king. He famously avoided looking like a king, but by building something far more dangerous, infrastructure. And if you've ever asked yourself, how do I stop surviving and start structuring? You're already living in Cosimo's world that we're going deep today, but I'll leave breadcrumbs. The hustle phase, what Florence rewarded. The bank, how money becomes reputation and reach. The political trap, his exile and return. Soft power, patronage as an influence engine, buildings, art, libraries. The modern mirror, leverage versus loudness. Let's step into Florence. Florence in the 1400s is a republic, on paper. In practice. It's a competitive arena where status comes from. Your network, your reputation, and whether people trust you with money because the city is a machine built for commerce, textiles, trade, contracts, and finance. And in this world, trust is not a vibe. Trust is a financial asset. Florence is basically linked in with knives. Everyone is honored to connect and also ready to destroy you in a committee vote. Into this world, Cosimo is born in 1389. His father, Giovanni di Bicci de Medici, builds the family's bank, dated to 1397 in many standard references. But here's the key. Cosimo doesn't just inherit wealth. He inherits a system. What does a bank really sell? Not gold, not coins. A serious bank sells three things: credit, the ability to act before you have cash in hand; connectivity, moving money across distance; trust, your name as collateral. Scholars of the Medici Bank describe it as a large, international operation at its peak, organized through branches and partnerships, with techniques suited to long-distance commerce and transfers. And Britannica notes Cosimo was initiated into high finance early and later managed papal finances, meaning the banks were plugged into major institutional money flows. Here's the first deep rabbit hole breadcrumb. Power doesn't begin where people clap. Power begins where systems depend on you. When the biggest institutions need your reliability, your influence becomes quiet. And quiet influence is the hardest to fight because it doesn't look like tyranny. Cosimo's influence grows, yet Florence still has factions and rival families. One major rival bloc is the Albizzi. Britannica's summary says they had Cosimo imprisoned in 1433 and that he returned triumphantly the next year when Medici power revived. This is a crucial moment in the hero's journey because the moment you go from successful to structural, people don't just envy you, they fear you. It's like when your friends were fine with you doing okay, but the second you start building systems, saving, investing, hiring, suddenly you're acting different. Yes, you are, because you're moving from survival to structure. And structure is a threat to anyone whose power depends on chaos. Cosimo gets imprisoned and forced out. Exile. Now pause here, because this is where the story becomes a blueprint. If Cosimo's power were only popularity, exile would end him. If his power were only office, exile would erase him. But his power was something else. Relationships plus capital plus credibility plus dependency. He doesn't rule because he wears a crown, that he rules because the city's operating system is partly wired through his networks. This is where modern viewers should lean in. If your whole life is built on hustle, a single setback can wipe you out. But if you build infrastructure, you can be physically removed and still affect outcomes. That is leveraged. A year later, the Medici regain power and Cosimo returns. And then he does something genius. He doesn't grab a flashy title. Kids Britannica notes he refused titles of lordship and held formal office only briefly, yet dominated civic life for decades. Translation: He avoids looking like a tyrant, while designing the city's incentives so that the city behaves Medici-friendly. This is the soft power mastery. Loans and favors that build loyalty networks that make allies depend on stability reputation that makes opposition look like disorder. Modern economic research even studies how the Medici era shaped political financial dynamics without necessarily rewriting the formal institutions, showing how influence can operate through incentives and networks. Humor beat. Cosimo is the type of man who could say, I'm not controlling anything, while controlling everything important. Now we hit the part most people misunderstand. Cosimo's spending wasn't just, I like pretty things. It was public relations plus legitimacy plus civic identity, packaged as beauty. Consider this. The official site for Palazzo Medici Riccardi states that Cosimo the Elder commissioned the palace project for the Medici residence, at a well-known milestone in Florentine intellectual life. The San Marco Library opened in 1444 and is often described as the first public library in Florence. Here's the breadcrumb. Patronage is not just generosity. Patronage is positioning. A palace says, we are stable. A library says, we are civilized. Support for artists and scholars says, we are the future. Cosimo is building a world where talent comes to Florence. Florence shines. The Medici look like the stewards of that shining. That's not just culture. That's governance by meaning. Here are the 4 gears, simple enough to follow, deep enough to change how you see power. Gear 1. Liquidity. If you can provide funds when others can't, you become the bridge over panic. That makes people listen. Gear 2. Network centrality. If you're the node connecting merchants, institutions, and officials, you become the default option. People don't even think to bypass you. Gear 3. Reputation. A bank is a promise. If your promise is trusted, your name becomes a currency. That's why banking history spends so much attention on organization, governance, and reliability. Gear 4. Patronage. You don't just buy objects. You buy the story people tell about you. And this is why Cosimo's power wasn't loud. It was architectural. So here's the modern mirror. You can hustle forever and still feel fragile, because hustle is energy, but structure is stability. Cosimo's lesson is not be rich. Cosimo's lesson is stop chasing moments. Start building systems. Systems create leverage. Leverage creates freedom. If you want to stop surviving and start structuring, start here. Build a reputation people can trust. Build a network you genuinely serve. Build a cash flow system, not vibes. Build assets that outlive your moods and invest in things that make your name mean something, because power isn't always a throne. Sometimes power is the person everyone calls when the city needs to work. And if you ever feel guilty for becoming more strategic, remember, Cosimo built soft power so effectively that history still calls him the blueprint, and he did it without even changing his LinkedIn headline to CEO of Florence. If you want more stories where history teaches modern leverage, subscribe and comment. Build the pipes if you're ready to stop surviving and start structuring.